Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland. And this week, I'm going to be focusing on Martin Scorsese's Boxcar Bertha. And I had never seen this film before, so this was my first time going into this one. But for those who haven't seen the show before, we have 3 segments. We start with coming attractions for the films that come out the week that this show releases. Then we jump into our feature film, and then wrap up with recommendations. This might be a bit of a lighter show. I didn't really get a chance to watch a whole lot of films this past week that I would recommend that I can talk about yet. And in terms of, generally I like to throw out a recommendation of a new film, one of my films that I've rewatched recently that I think people would enjoy, and also something from my watch list. I didn't get to watch any of my films or any of my watch list films in the past week since I recorded my last show, so just got one film to recommend. But the thing is, let's start it off with the top with the coming attractions for the week of Friday, the September 24th. We do get Dear Evan Hansen, which I wasn't super excited about even before the reviews came out. I'm like, why is Ben Platt in this? He looks really creepy. But I had never seen the stage play or anything, like the musical or anything. But that's definitely not my most anticipated. My most anticipated, which this is getting a theatrical release this week, but then coming out on Netflix, is The Guilty. And it's from Anton Fuqua, who's very hit or miss. And Infinite I did not like that. So he's not riding a great track record at this moment. And I do love the original film, which is sitting somewhere down there. And this is a remake of a film about a man who receives an emergency call because he works in the emergency call center, and he has to navigate this particular situation. And who do you get to anchor a whole entire film by himself? A Jake Gyllenhaal. So that got me excited. So Jake Gyllenhaal's in it. It's based off of this film that I love. Out of the options, this definitely stood out to me the most. I'm very concerned that, it's an American remake of a great foreign language film. Not many of them work great. You have The Departed, but a lot of them, it's just they don't really capture it, or they try to do too much with it. And I hope that they don't steer too far away from what made this film interesting. Was it's bottle type episode. It's a film, but a bottle episode feel, where it's just you're stuck there the whole time. And so we'll see how it goes. I'm very intrigued. Jake Gyllenhaal's fantastic, so I'm sure he will give an amazing performance, at the very least. But we'll see about The Guilty when that comes out. Now, shifting gears to the feature film of the week, we have Boxcar Bertha. And right off the bat, I was like, see, this is one of those kinds of things where it's Martin Scorsese doesn't all just do gangster movies. And it's just this takes place in the South, and definitely out of his wheelhouse. And then the movie started, and it started getting into it, and I'm like, see, this is very different. And then as the film goes on, I'm like, oh, this is a crime thriller kind of thing. And it's just oh, that makes sense. It's a Scorsese movie. Obviously, Scorsese does a lot of different kinds of films, a lot more than people will give him credit for. But the thing is, this film is that crime thriller kind of thing, and it's definitely violent. It definitely has that Scorsese stamp of you could tell this is early Scorsese. There was a lot of aggression. There was a lot of attitude thrown into this film, and you can feel the music permeating throughout the whole entire film, which you can feel that in Scorsese's films, except for Silence. And you can feel this in your face perspective on things, and Scorsese's always right there at you while you're watching a film of his, and you can feel it. You can feel his early voice throughout this film. You felt it in Who's That Knocking at My Door, but you'd also really feel it here. And obviously his next feature after this is Mean Streets, which I'll be talking about next week, hopefully with Jim, who'll be joining me from the movie club. But that feels so much on the surface as a Scorsese film. This one, like, the setting and everything doesn't really sell that. You start off this film with this young woman whose dad dies in, like, this plane crash, and then things get violent real quick, and you're just like, oh, people are dead. People are getting really beat up. And then you have this young woman, Bertha, like, hopping on boxcars and trying to get the hell out of here on the back of a train. And you're getting this, like, this is definitely a 60s film. And even though, like, hey, it's like 1972, but, like, this is capturing that energy of something like this angsty new generation taking it to the man and everything, and you feel that permeate throughout this whole entire film. And it's such an important fixture in this film that you have that. And it's that attitude and that energy that goes from coast to coast, this hour and 28-minute film, which, yes, it's only an hour and 28 minutes. This isn't like Wolf of Wall Street, which is literally twice as long. But the thing is, like, you have this kind of energy just propelling you through this film. And there's definitely moments where it's just like, it's not super engaging. It's not offering anything particularly new or exciting. There's definitely moments of excitement throughout the film. But the thing is, it's like, there's definitely those moments where you could feel that the story wasn't the most fleshed out in terms of character. It's very interesting in terms of, like, gender roles in this film, because there's some things that Bertha, like, steps up and really takes charge in this film, which I appreciate about that. And you're taking a look at this film, and there's tons of violence. Like, violence. And, like, ear-shattering shotgun blast sounds throughout this film. It's like a roar of a tank cannon, just like, like, shooting out at you. And there's one particular sequence at the very end of this film with a bunch of shotgun shots of people, like, flinging through the air, just blood splattering everywhere, and it's so visceral. And that's what Scorsese brings to the film. There's such a visceral nature about this. There's no, like, nuance or, like, subtlety about those kinds of things. It's like, this is in your face. There's aggression here. And it really hammers home the violence. And there's a particularly violent moment at the very end of this film, which is, wow. Like, it's brutal. And it connects to some of the deeper themes that we'll chat about a little bit. But this film rides high on violence throughout the whole entire thing. And violence is such a big part of it. It feels like, and this is a nice segue into, like, this is basically like a Bonnie and Clyde story. And you have, like, there's a couple more, like, obviously you have their little gang, but you have Bertha at the center of it. And you have her close companion, Big Bill Shelley, played by David Carradine. And you have others like Barry Primus as Rake Brown and Bernie Kays as Von Morton, who really gets to nail some things in this film. And, like, he gets his moments, and especially towards the end. But you have this gang, they're doing all these crimes, they're trying to take down, like, the big rich people and stuff like that. And it's just like, more or less, this feels like Scorsese's attempt at Bonnie and Clyde. And it's a little rough around the edges. Like, obviously Bonnie and Clyde is too. But, like, this film has, like, a rough atmosphere about it. But also, how it's put together feels a little rough. And I think that's where this falls short compared to, say, like, Bonnie and Clyde. I feel like this one is just, you turn on the hose and you just let it go, and it's just like whipping all around. And that's Scorsese with, like, his creative just energy, like, shooting all over the place. And it's just like, there isn't that, like, refined restraint. And Scorsese picks that up throughout his filmography. And obviously now he's not a young man, he's an 80-year-old man. And there's definitely a bit of refinedness. And it's interesting because, like, this feels like an exploitation film. And it feels like something like Tarantino would make. And where it's just like, it's just out there. and there's a lack of, like I mentioned, subtlety about it. But the parallels that you could give between this and Bonnie and Clyde, and like if you had to pick, like watch Bonnie and Clyde, that's a better film. It's a Best Picture nominated film. Like this film feels like there's a lot of great energy and a lot of great effort put into it, but it doesn't always feel like it comes together. But the thing is, it's like there's some bold choices in terms of camera work of like, here's like somebody gets shot and like the camera's like following this body flying through the air obnoxiously. They had to have them like on strings or something, pulling them all the way back. And there's one particular sequence where like it's bam, in your face and just aggressive. And like I've mentioned this a couple of times throughout this episode so far, but just aggression is such a key part of this film because there's an aggressive nature, there's this attitude. It's really about what this era was and when this film came out and what the zeitgeist was, especially amongst young people, which this film focuses on because you have Bertha and Bill Shelley, who are both, these are young people going up against like John Carradine, who is like the big moneybags guy, who's like this older man who has all this money, and it's very on the nose. It's very clear exactly what they're going for here in terms of like the themes and the imagery and stuff like that. But it's still like there's it in your face. And then you have the cast, like Barbara Hershey gives a really strong performance here. She lays it all out. There's a couple of pretty graphic sex scenes in this film where it's just like you see her completely naked, and she has this way about her character. There's this energy, there's this confidence, and you can't help but be drawn to her. There's this magnetism, and Barbara Hershey has that energy so perfectly. And especially Bertha has agency here. Like, she gets up in this guy's face who's tempting to shoot one of her friends, and she grabs the gun and shoots this man herself. And she's the one who's, like, charging the way out, pulling him behind her friend. And it's just, like, she takes charge, and Bertha's an interesting character. And she stands out so much in this time period because, like, she takes charge. You have David Carradine's Bill Shelley, who's an interesting figure in this film, and there's this love, this connection that he has with Bertha, and you feel that all the way through the film, and that connection is manipulated by Scorsese to connect the audience and draw us along, and really, he gets us a couple times. And with this connection, and you have Barry Primus, who plays Rick Brown, who does a fine job, and it's interesting because, like, how he's introduced and you find out, like, he's a Yankee in this very southern setting. And it's, like, very much like, oh, it's the Scorsese in the situation. And I jokingly was like, this is actually a true story about Scorsese's first experiences going to the South. And it's like, you can tell that, like, Rake was kind of that channeling of, this is that northern sensibility in this, like, lawless, basically feeling southern experience that you get in this film, because everybody's just doing whatever. It's like frontier justice going on in this film. And you, like I mentioned, you have this southern setting where it's the deep south, their perspectives on things. There's a lot of racism, there's a lot of sexism in this film. So there's traditional ideas and ideals that really permeate this story. And because, like, this gang has a woman in it, and a black man, and a Yankee in it. Basically, David Carradine's, like, the one, like, oh, there's a southern boy in here. But, like, you have this experience where, like, they're the outsiders in society in this place. And they're taking charge and going right at those southern thoughts and perspectives of this time. Like, this takes place in the 30s. So, and then you have those religious overtones where it's like the undertones where you have this particular thing that happens at the very end of the film that, like, is very obviously representing something there. And you can't help but miss it, especially after watching Who's That Knocking at My Door, and the religious imagery throughout that film. It's that Judeo-Christianity, that Catholicism that's really brought into these films by Scorsese, because there's such big parts of Italian culture, and that permeates in this film as well. This is a rough cut feeling kind of film, where it's like, I think Scorsese was like early on in his career really trying out something here, and I don't know how much it really worked all the way, but it's still something really interesting to watch and experience. And especially if you're trying to be a completist like myself here, going through all of Scorsese's work, I think this is one of his more interesting entries here that feels very different from a setting standpoint and perspective, but still it has that Scorsese feel. There's that aggression, there's that energy, there's just like unrelenting power behind it. And I feel like that really helps this film a lot. And in the end, I think this is an interesting experience. I wouldn't say that I really loved this film or really liked this film. I wouldn't go as far as saying this is a great film at all. Wouldn't say this is a really good film. I think there's a lot going on here, and I think the experience is worth taking, especially because it's only an hour and 28 minutes of an investment here. But go check it out if you're curious. But that's our feature of the week, Boxcar Bertha. And next week, we'll be talking about Mean Streets, hopefully with Jim, like I mentioned before. But to wrap up, we have our third segment, which is recommendations, and this is building off of last week because I got to see Prisoners of the Ghostland. And oh my god, is this movie ridiculous. Like, if you were hoping for this crazy mashup, over-the-top genre flick with this a ridiculous and committed Nick Cage performance, it delivers all of that. Exactly. And it's a crazy ride, insanity, just this manic energy about this film. And I was really impressed by Sion Sono, who just brought everything that he possibly could into this film and delivered this crazy thrill ride that I did not... Because, like, you expect this movie to be weird, but I don't know if you could really comprehend how out there it is until you experience it. So hopefully you get a chance to experience it. I know it's in some indie theaters. I think it's on VOD as well right now, so go check that one out. It is insane. But that's my recommendation for this week, and that's the show. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about my thoughts on Boxcar Bertha, and I hope, you know, if it piques your interest, you go give it a watch. It's streaming now for 12, well, as of recording this, it's 12 days. By the time this posts, you're only going to have a couple days. It's still on Amazon Prime right now, so give it a watch. But that's the show, and thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.